On Health Matters today, we're looking at a condition that is one of the most common but least talked about, asthma. Surprisingly, we sat up and took notice of this chronic disease when COVID arrived, and we heard that those with asthma were among the most vulnerable. According to findings released around World Asthma Day earlier this year, asthma is the most common chronic disease in children and adolescents globally, and one of the most common chronic diseases in adults. The number of cases across Africa has been growing. Asthma in sub-Saharan Africa is reportedly underdiagnosed and undertreated. It's also surrounded by myths and stigma, which results in deaths that most likely could have been prevented.
One of the important things about asthma that it's really global health conditions, and it's a chronic inflammatory conditions. So it affects people of all age. Nobody is exempted from 0 up to 90, 100 years old. But the difference that in children tend to be more common than in adults. And most of the children, they tend to be more allergic to allergies. So this patient means they got very sensitive airways to allergies, and means simple thing that normal don't cause problem to others will completely trigger bronchospasm. Like for instance, a child going playing in the grass, and they will completely have a block up. And those ones, they need a quick reliever to relieve that, and also they might need to use antihistamine to relieve the allergies. And most of them, the allergies normally start in the nose and then goes downward.
There is still no explanation as to why some people get asthma and others don't. But what we do know is that there are certain things that could trigger an attack.
Asthma can be triggered by a lot of things. One of them could be like infection, if you're having just common cold like flu or bacterial infection. But also most common is allergies like pollen, hay fevers, but also cold air, sometimes winter. Asthma tends to be worse in winter. And also the emotions, anxiety can trigger asthma. And also those with the acid reflux also can trigger asthma. So the list of triggers for asthma is really endless.
There are different scenarios where asthma could flare up.
There are obviously those patients, number one, I think, look, there will be asthmatics. Once they're asthmatic, then they will have some period of where they're actually normal. And out of blue, they develop certain kind of symptoms. And most of them, they can link it to certain kind of exposure, what they get exposure to. And what happens actually varies with the time and the day. So sometimes you find out of blue, you're out of control because either you went exercising and that becomes a trigger, or because you're having emotional stress, or because you get exposed to those triggers that we just discussed.
It's therefore important to know the signs and symptoms of asthma.
The symptom of asthma really is a symptom of respiratory because as a result of bronchospasm. There are 4 of them: coughing, tight chest, shortness of breath, and wheezing. And those symptoms, as I say, the severity will be determined by the triggers that they get exposed to. But the symptoms tend to be worse also in the early hours of morning, between 2 to 3 o'clock. That's more classic of asthma. And most of these patients, they tend to wake up at those particular time and start coughing, they can't breathe. And that's what we say, that's really how asthma it is.
Sadly, there is no cure for asthma, but it can be managed. So it's important to track it in order to get the correct treatment or update your treatment when needed.
What we have is a steroid-based treatment, but you inhale them and use a pump to use them. So there are a lot of devices that you can use to deliver them. Asthma treatment is fairly difficult. In my practice, I see most of the patients that come, they're on the right treatment. However, they don't know how to use the devices, and that's where the problem is.
It's important to have an asthma action plan that you would have worked out with your doctor.
Most of these patients, of course, if they are diagnosed as asthmatic, then they should be on the treatment, what we call reliever, and then preventer. Okay, so it means they need to use their reliever immediately, and then once that, they need to stick to their preventer. Sometimes it's prescribed by general practitioner and they actually don't know how to train these patients. So sometimes it's really not so helpful. So they need to get to slotted help from professionals that are well trained for asthma, and even there's GPs that have done what we call occupational health, and they know how to train people to use asthmatic device. And this, when they actually use that, can relieve their bronchospasm immediately within the seconds.
To sum it up, if you don't treat and manage your asthma, it can be fatal. Know and monitor your symptoms, have an asthma action plan, and get emergency medical attention when needed.